We use play to help groups of people with different knowledge bases communicate better, and we call our process player-centric design. And I'll talk a little bit more about it. So what we normally do is we partner with nonprofits, universities, global organizations to better communicate with their stakeholders and create more sustainable solutions together. We work with complex systems ranging from climate change to urban planning, and we've done projects about false confessions with the Innocence Project and social risk for the World Bank so far.
And one of the sort of key aspects of player-centered design is something called agency mapping. And in game design, agency is a super important aspect. It's what a player can do. You're looking for the potential of a human in a larger system. So we're trying to map this out and give people a little bit of agency, right? What can they do? It gives them power. It makes them feel good. It makes games compelling. It makes them awesome. It makes us fun to play. And so when we do this, when we're mapping out the human in these systems, we use a game system and so that we can engage with them in a new way. And we've seen scientists and some journalists and people that are social organizers engage with our systems and our games and actually get new insights on the process that they use through play. It gives you a little bit of critical distance that you may not had before, and you can understand some new things about it. So today we're going to take our method and talk about sort of online journalism and participatory journalism. So participation is incredibly important to us as game designers and as well as anybody creating media online today. And I think it's difficult to have a game without players. We haven't created one of those yet. And I think it's also really important for journalists and media creators, as Ella said earlier, when they had people participate in the news-making process, more people were engaged. And news today has like kind of an over-participation problem. It doesn't seem like people know what to do with everyone that wants to jump in on Reddit and Facebook and retweets. So we think we can help.
So games are defined by participation, as you might have expected. And as designers, we are only part authors of our games. Without players, there would be no play. Games are a young medium with a lot of potential and a lot of problems, as some of you might know. But player participation is really not one of them. As game designers, we create worlds for players to create their own meaning or find their own meaning. The key phrase here being their own meaning. As designers, our challenge is to make sure that our players take away insights that support our goals, and we have a few strategies to help with that. And we'd like to share our experiences and the lessons that we've learned along the way with you today. Creating a space where players find agency, no matter who they are and where they're from, is paramount to our process. It's our job as designers to structure these spaces so it's valuable to us and to our players. The key is keeping in mind structured versus unstructured participation. Structured participation is useful to both the organizers and the participants. It's a form of interaction where organizers can get useful information and feedback, and most importantly, participants should feel like they have agency to contribute to the conversation. Unstructured participation, unfortunately, is not useful to anyone. It makes participants feel useless and powerless, thereby giving them no agency, and often has participants lash out with anger and negativity. And it's a chore for the organizers rather than being the boon it could be. A little anecdote. One of our early research projects was with the Red Cross Climate Center, where we brought in a set of games to talk to farmers in South Sulawesi in Indonesia about the changing climate in that archipelago. We were going to, and how it was going to affect the mangrove forests that are very useful in maintaining that ecosystem. We were using games that use dice to communicate the incremental devastation that would happen to the region over the next few years. However, in our enthusiasm to help, we didn't really think to check how we were making these points. We bought in a set of games that were that used rolling dice to simulate the climate change, but rolling dice is a lot like a lot of common gambling games like roulette or craps. We forgot completely that our audience, our group of farmers, were from a religion that didn't really permit gambling, and they might look at rolling dice as gambling. We're so focused on helping them that we didn't check if our innovative approach would actually work for our players. And in a nutshell, it really didn't because of the dice. The funny thing is, the dice weren't even that essential to the game. They'd been tested as a fun way to communicate complex system changes in New York, and we just assumed everyone would share the sentiment. So in this case, games didn't allow for agency or impact, not because the games were bad, because we ignored the cultural needs of our players. So we returned a year later with a workshop instead of a game. No magic quick fixes this time. And we co-developed a series of games with the audience. Well, you won't be surprised to hear we never needed dice, and we ended up creating a beautiful set of mini-games using local objects and themes. It allowed our players to become designers and have ownership over these solutions. We facilitated the experience, but they created it. There are a few steps to creating great participatory spaces that we've learned over the years. Ensuring that you understand what the expectations are of your participants is paramount. Otherwise, they won't feel welcome. Good communication by design finds ways to work around issues all the time. Fit your conversation to the culture of your players, not the other way around. Give your players tasks to do that gives them direction and agency. Co-designing content with your players helps because they're content experts too. Have a specific goal in mind that is clearly stated at the beginning so it allows everyone to work towards the same goal together. We create spaces with some values, intentionally or not. So if your space doesn't reflect the value of your participants, then feel free to change that space.
Once you have participants, they come into your space with a whole set of cultural values and norms that they understand. And we didn't respect that in the Indonesian example the first time, but thankfully we did the second time, and it turned out all right. So how can we create rules in a social space to make it productive? Let's look at a social space like Reddit. Some Reddit boards are amazing. They have kittens. There's great conversations. People get a lot of value out of them. And some Reddit boards are the ones your mother may have warned you about. But in either case, we can figure out there's some norms here that people have constructed, the participants have constructed together, and they understand, oh, this Reddit board's okay to be a horrible person, this Reddit board is not. So how do we find societal norms and how do we construct those within a space? Now, in games, this starts with rule making. We say, here are the rules of the game. We're playing rugby, you can tackle people. If we're not playing rugby and you tackle someone, it might not work out so well. So we can dictate these rules, and then hopefully they'll be enforced by the players. And then it's interesting because if you have the right set of rules, creativity, like especially strict rules, creativity will flourish. But if you have too strict of rules, then you create a sort of authoritarian space where people don't feel that agency. And so like if we just take games and apply them onto an online context, we could use referees. But we've tried this a lot, moderators and admins. This is a big labor of love. It may not work out very well. And even in game space, you have to pay people to do this, right? One of the ways that we do it, especially in our games, is we demonstrate the correct way. So one of us or somebody that's helping us co-facilitate will come in and say, this is the way you do it. And sometimes we have a secret person, this is called a shill, and they're in the audience and nobody knows that they're not a player, and they do it and they're like, oh, like this? And you're like, yeah, that's right, thank you. And then we explain our motivations when we enter a space. We're here to look at these types of topics, and we're here to think about these things. And once you explain motivations, you can ask for input along those lines. You've sort of established the rules of the space, and then people can add on to your rules. And then give specific prompts. The reason people love things like crosswords is because they like to fill in blanks. They like to fill in boxes. So if you give people boxes to fill in, they're going to try to find that agency and try to find meaning there and put their own stuff in.
So this is Driving Force, a game about communication breakdowns in NGOs that provide critical aid to those who desperately need it. Drivers and managers couldn't understand each other's professional challenges since the social space that drivers and managers normally existed in didn't allow them to directly address each other. Play gave them that critical distance and made them realize that their assumptions about each other had been wrong. This finally allowed them to communicate. This game has been a success because we were able to craft a social space, and it's been to over a dozen countries, and a master's thesis has been written about it. So in games, the first lesson we learn is that our assumptions about our players are always incorrect until tested. We have to embrace an iterative process of designing experiences where we constantly respond and modify our work to be closer to what our players expect. Our motto is fail faster, fail better, so we can plan that into our design process.
So that's why we have something called a play test, where we test play. If we assume that players are going to play a certain way and they don't, they're not incorrect for doing that. We're incorrect for constructing the space incorrectly, right? And so we need to be able to make a space that players find agency in and we find value in at the same time. It's a conversation through play. So, and we're always constantly trying to figure out what players want and build that structure around that, rather than the other way around, trying to force fit our values onto them. This is a game that was, it left its London in about a year and a half later in Hanoi. And we do lots of play tests, and they're often messy at first and then neater as they go along. So it's a fun process. And I like to think of this as like building a barn. You could just take a bunch of like wood and nails and like stick it together. Or you could have a bunch of wood and nails and talk to a bunch of people about how great barns are and how you need to keep the rain off of your cow, and then let them at it. They may not come back with the barn you have in mind, but they will come back with something that will help, and you'll learn something interesting about the way they think about structures and spaces in this way. So who is our player? Homo Interneticus, if you will. We're in a college, right? We can speak in Latin. The values that the player might have are internet freedom, right? Radical free speech, the belief in a techno-meritocracy. All of these are sort of undermined by the technology of the internet. It allows the best ideas to come forward. You can learn anything you want on YouTube. You're good to go and find yourself in find oppression and expose it.
But how has the internet actually been used by these players? Unlike a journalist, Homo Interneticus does not always check facts, does not care about protecting sources, and really doesn't prioritize minimizing harm. They don't really see the impact of what they do a lot of times, although it may come from a place of good intentions, perhaps. Well-meaning people on the internet can lead to harm. We've seen many examples of this. I'm sure most of us remember Coney 2012. Or Find the Boston Bombers on Reddit, and so many other projects that came out of some so-called good intentions but ended up doing more harm than good. There's an overlap between journalists and the way people use the internet. And the problem is that these spaces aren't constructed in a way that leads to a productive pursuit of the truth.
And truth is really where it's at. We're trying to make some truth here when we're either online or on being journalists. And this is reflective in the initial values of how the internet was constructed. There's old Tim Berners-Lee up at CERN putting together the internet. And the idea that you can click on a link and immediately see the source right there based on what you're reading is a fairly powerful one. I'm from Tennessee, so it's easy for me to talk about things like barns. And so if Tim Berners-Lee was going to construct a barn, let's go back to that analogy, he kind of like brought a bunch of TCP/IP and some Cat5 cable and left it out and said, hey, the internet's going to be great. And then the barn that people came back with looked a little like this. Has a big old advertisement on top of it. And we've seen this play out over and over, especially recently, click-based and ad-based tracking algorithms and that sort of thing. And in addition to that, I'm sure we've all seen this quote. We've seen this quote a lot. But in sort of like space of online media, it's sort of turned into this. It's not just repeating a lie, it's sharing the lie over and over again. And that creates the truth. If my grandmother and my parents and my brother and whoever else share something, I'm probably going to believe it. And not only that, when you share it, somebody gets money for it. And the content and the money from it are completely devoid of each other.
The way that journalists have been seeking the truth and credibility is very different from how the internet creates credibility. This creates a dissonance between truth-making at the source versus content created by untrained users thinking they're doing the right thing. Online, the truth is what you think feels real, not something you can verify and check, and that's the problem. Credibility is a product of quantity versus quality. It doesn't help that the most successful funding model for the internet encourages sharing over validation. Coming back to Goebbels, at a certain point, these small lies can be leveraged to control by larger systems of control, like the state. To create the truth, it seems convenient to just keep to create the truth that seems convenient, all that folks have to do is leverage these small lies into a larger and larger lie. And this is something that we can all relate to at present times. Since the internet, as it now stands, primarily rewards those who propagate, this is a big deal. If we want to create participatory spaces for journalism to exist in, we have to be as specific about what these spaces want to do as we can. We need to define the rules of these spaces and make the challenges something that the users will seek, not resent. Right now, we've constructed a space where the truth doesn't matter, but getting clicks does.
So what do we do next? We have this ad tracking technology that's been actually best sort of captured by large corporations. This is on a Google slide deck, right? This sort of whole presentation is funded by this technology. But that doesn't mean we need to give up on this, right? There are other ways of engaging with users outside of the sort of current paradigm of click-based money-making advertising that can be put in place, but they have to be specific.
In 2012, Propublica used something called casino-driven design, usually a toxic style of space creation used by casinos to keep people gambling, but they used it to design a digital space where the users could help them get through a large amount of data. More than 1,000 contributors submitted over 94,000 transcripts to help turn messy invoices from local TV networks into clean data in order to track back money in swing districts across the US. They couldn't have done this if they hadn't realized that the users wanted to help. Not just consume their content, but they wanted to contribute to it. And they weren't afraid to take risks, leveraging insights from web design, architecture, game design, and internet ethnography to incentivize their audiences. So as we go into the future present, new models are going to have to be created.
And if we create these models specifically enough so we can structure the participation enough, we can actually have a better place to create truth with people contributing than not. And now we invite you to participate with us online if you so desire.
Thank you.
Very good. Questions? Questions? Oh, sorry. Of course, I went the wrong direction. Hang on.
Hi, I've spoken to you at length about this, which I find really fascinating, the gamification of news. Can you talk about how elements of game can be included in storytelling and in journalism, and how that impacts the story that you're telling?
Sure. So one of the things we've noticed a lot is when you tell someone to do something, they resent you. And that's why a lot of our early work came from climate change, because folks were very resistant to the idea of climate change in 2011 when we started working. And we realized that all of this is for their benefit. All of this is going to affect them the most, but they still didn't care. And to us, it seemed like the approach that climate scientists had been taking till that point was fear, facts, just a rotation of these two things. And that just made people resistant to listening at all. So what we did was we created a space where we allowed users, or the players in our case, to kind of feel out how much impact they could have had on the system. What we did was we let them figure it out for themselves. So we let our players fail a lot and fail a lot in the game. We played with climate scientists where we encouraged them to kind of destroy the environment to sort of get them to empathize with builders who had other kind of limitations on them. So the idea here was to build for conversations instead of direct information dissemination. So if there's a topic that's, for example, our project with the Innocence Project, it was about false confessions, and it's something that millennials have a really hard time understanding because of the black and white kind of connection to cause and effect that we sometimes tend to have. So we made a game where players could play out how easy it is to get entangled in a situation where you give up a false confession. And by doing it themselves, they saw how easy it is for someone else to do it. So instead of having to read reams of data, reams of information like we did, and watch tons and tons of really heartbreaking documentaries, they could play a 15-minute experience that would get them to ask the questions. And that's what our goal is. So we think that news could also embrace a similar approach.
And a lot of the VR, AR, 360 video, the amount of production that's involved in that is actually less than a lot of simple games. And games are sort of like allowing you to feel a system. So if you're doing a project about the prison industrial complex, can you make a very simple, small game in a day, which I know a lot of people that can do that in game design, that'll make me feel like feels like to be in solitary, something like that.
In fact, some of my students just did that this semester.
Ben and Mohini, thank you so much.
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.